next at the filling in a guest list activity here. So this is another live edit and output practice where we're now, instead of using a for loop or a while loop, we are going to use a do while loop method here. And what we end up needing to do is taking a list of names that are stored in an array and put them into a guest list. But it's not super simple, of course. We don't want to let Phil and Lola in because they are greedy and rude. They always eat the food at our parties. So we have two lists. One is for guests to admit and one is for guests to refuse. So you can see we have our list. Phil and Lola are not at the beginning or the end of the list. They're about 3/4 of the way through. We have a constant that has been set up called admitted, and that's going to output names into the admitted section up here. And then we have constant set for refused. It's going to output the names on the refused, so they're not on the list. So we're also being provided with a combination here, admitted, where the text content is output here. So that's what these two lines are going to do. They output the HTML. So ultimately we're going to append the names that are allowed in and the names that are not allowed in. So in the instructions here it says we want to write a loop that will iterate from 0 to the length of the people in the array. We need to start with the initializer of 0. So we set let I equals 0, but we need to know what our conditions are. So during each loop iteration, check if the current array item is equal to Phil or Lola. So we have to say something like, do this logic while the position in the array does not equal the word Phil and does not equal the word Lola. That might be one way to kind of pseudo code that out. So we can just take this line and just put it in here as a comment. So during each loop, check to see if the current array item is equal to Phil or Lola. So we could start by kind of roughing in an if statement here. So if, and to target the array, we're going to say people in our condition here. So if people, and since we know we're going to be in a loop, the iteration, so whatever iteration we're on to get to Phil, we'll use that here. So to target whatever that person is in the loop, we're going to set it equal to Phil. And then we also have to check for Lola. So we can say if the people index is equal to Phil, or the people index is set to Lola, make sure we spelled those right, then do something. So if that is true, we want to, let's see, if it is true, put that in here, concatenate the array item to the end of the refused paragraph's text content, followed by a comma and a space. So what we need to be able to do now is append, but we would need to know that people's name and concatenate a comma and a space. So we can kind of work on this from the inside out. So we know how the output is supposed to look. And so we'll say people I, and this is assuming that we've hit Phil, people I, and then plus comma space like that. And that should take care of both Phil and Lola as it loops through. So next thing we will want to do is probably the same thing. This is for the refused and then this is going to be for the admit. So we're going to write a list either way, whether they're in or out. So next thing we have to do is write the text out. And so in the example here, they provided this refused text content. So I'm going to cut that. And so we're going to say refused text content is going to be plus equal. So what that means is it's actually going to be plus equal, meaning it's going to add and then set its value to the result. So it's going to, on the first time it runs for a refused person, it's going to take whatever was already in the list and append the person's name and a comma and a space. So we can also do the same thing for the admitted. So we're going to say admit, and the plus equal now is going to write the list of the people that are allowed in. So if we look at our logic here, we started if condition, and here's our curly brace that opens it. We can assume that's going to end here. So if it's those people, they get added to the refused list. So otherwise, we want them added to the admitted list. So this is our clue here where we're going to put in our else. So we're going to say if it's one of those people, add them to the refused list. Otherwise, add them to the admitted list. So now we don't really know, or we haven't really specified the loop type here. And so we want this to work while one part of the if statement is true or false. So this is where we know that we should be doing a do while loop here. So I'm going to start with a curly brace up there. So it's saying do this while some criteria. So we want to do this and come down to here. We want to iterate through the list of names there. And let's see what we have next here. So let me comment this out. I'm actually gonna, well, let me add one more line here before we start uncommenting this to test. So if we start with a do, it's going to do all that, and then that's our actual logic that's working and all this. So we want to make sure we've got everything kind of ordered right. So do opens here, and it's going to close after the I++. So we'll close that there. And then the while portion says do all this while something is true. So we're going to say while I is less than the number of people in the list. So say people length. So let's see what this does. And no guarantees that this is going to work the first time, but hopefully we'll get a little bit of feedback somewhere. Okay, so that all popped up at the top, looks good. So it's working the way we planned. Go down here. So looks good. So we targeted Phil and Lola. They're on the refused list. And then we admitted everyone else on the list. So this looks good. It wrote everything out. But based on our exercise here, it says extra bonus. After completing the above successfully, you're going to be left with two lists, comma separated, but they're not going to be grammatically correct, meaning they don't end with a period. So what we would need to do is alter this somehow. So it says there's a comma at the end of each one. Can you figure out how to write the lines that slice the last comma off in each case and adds a full stop, which is a period. So use full string methods. So they said slice, so we're going to say slice. Okay, so it says when you know where the substring starts inside of a string, and you know which character you want to slice, it can be used to extract the following. So wonder if there's anything we can do. Just slice the last character off and replace. That might actually be something to try. Well, if we did a replace, it would replace all the commas. So we still need to be able to get the last item there. So we need to work from the inside out again on this. So let's start with our refused list, which is our second one here. So ultimately what we want to do is slice, and starting from a certain position, so starting from 0 and ending at some point. And we want to replace that with a period. So if we know that we're starting at the word refuse, and we're ending on Lola, comma, 0 through whatever that value is. So we need to know the length of the refused text content. So that's a number that we'd then have to take a certain number away from to remove and then add back a period. So our slice parameter here says start on 0, and then we want the length of refused, length, like that. But we need to finish the beginning of this. So our slice, we are looking at this concatenation. So this tells me I am working with refused.text content. And since we're changing it, we're going to set it equal to whatever logic we're trying to write here. So again, we're dealing with refused.text content, and then we're slicing from the beginning of it to the length of that text. So let's see what happens. We can hit that, not really seeing anything. So let's take this text and let's put it into a console and let's play with it there. So I'm going to say let refused equal that, and refuse is that. So we want to refuse slice 0 to refuse dot length. So what if we say -1 there? Okay, so -1 takes off the comma. So down here, where we have our refused length, we might want to say -1. Oops, so look what happened. Our whole list went away. So we've cut that whole piece out. So why did that happen? So let's take a look here. Refused. Oh, it's not the length of the whole value. It's actually the length of the text. So we're going to do text.text content, and then the length -1. But remember, when we concatenate all these, it's actually a comma and a space. So we're not seeing, look at the end where I highlight, actually it doesn't show me the space there either. But I'm guessing we're not seeing it because we're not subtracting two values. Okay, so there we go. We trimmed down Phil and Lola, And now we just want to concatenate a period on the end or full stop. And that finishes that one. So now all we should really need to do is copy this refused version and change it to admit. Everywhere we say refused. And nothing. It's admitted. And there we go. It changed the output there. So looking at this code, as we finish this exercise, it looks pretty complex, full of lots of different strategy and logic here. Oops, what happened there? It went away. Oh no, there we go. What I was going to do is remove some of our comments here, just so we can see the raw code without all the extra noise in there. That way I think you might get a better picture of what we've done in the do while. So remember, with do while, we set our initializer value outside of the looping, and we say do whatever is in these brackets as long as a certain condition is true. And that certain condition is do all this while I is less than the length of the people values. So what that means is the first time this runs is 0. So while 0 is less than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, do all this stuff. So it's going to check and say if the people for the first loop would be 0, so if 0 is Phil or Lola, then do that. So that's false. So then it says, okay, Chris is allowed to be on the admitted list, so plus equals his name and a comma and a space to the admitted list. And then it says, okay, increment by 1. And it says, while 1 is less than the length of the people on the list, do this. And 2, then 3, so 0, 1, 2, 3. Once we get to the fourth loop, where I is 4, it's going to say if people 4 is Phil, which would be this, or Lola, then that's true. So this side of the if statement runs, and plus equals them onto the list with a comma and a space, goes to 5, and it's Lola, so hers runs, she gets added to the refuse list, and it goes through Sam, Kay, and Bruce. They're not on that list, so we add them to the admit. So hopefully that was helpful to walk through some of the logic there and see how to test and get this one working.